Okay, so let's unpack this. You've got this scenario. A father, a loving father. Here's a command directly from God.
Yeah.
Sacrifice your son, your beloved son. I mean, it just throws you right straight into this tangle of ethical problems.
It really does. And that's the raw, unsettling heart of Søren Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, published way back in 1843, and under that really interesting pseudonym, Johannes de Silentio.
Right, Johannes de Silencio. And what's really striking is how this story, which feels almost ancient, almost mythical, still grabs us, still forces us to think so hard.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, based on the sources you listeners shared with us. We want to sort of pinpoint the key ideas and figure out why this book from the 1840s still feels so alive, so relevant, and frankly, so challenging.
Totally. And that name, Johannes de Silencio, John of the Silence, that itself tells you something straight away, doesn't it?
It really does.
It signals we're not getting like a standard philosophical treatise.
Yeah.
Johannes presents himself as someone who's fascinated by faith, especially Abraham's faith. But he admits he can't actually get it himself. He can't make that leap. It's this, indirect way of looking at it, exploring it from the outside almost.
That's a crucial point. And the silence itself. Think about it. How could Abraham possibly explain what he was about to do in any normal ethical term?
He couldn't. It would sound monstrous.
Exactly. Monstrous. So Johannes kind of embodies that silence, that point where language just fails to capture the essence of Abraham's personal, seemingly irrational commitment.
Right. And then there's the subtitle, a dialectical lyric. That tells you so much about the method, I think. It's this deliberate mix of, on one hand, really rigorous philosophical thinking, that's the dialectical bit, and on the other, this deeply emotional, almost poetic exploration, the lyric part. It suggests you need both logic and, well, an awareness of deep human feeling, anxiety even, to grapple with something like faith.
And what's key about dialectical here, I think, is that Kierkegaard isn't aiming for some neat Hegelian synthesis where opposites resolve.
Yep.
No, he's emphasizing the paradoxes, the contradictions that just remain. They don't go away. He's highlighting these tensions that you can't resolve with reason alone, pointing towards the need for that leap.
Exactly. And the core of all this, the knot at the center, is that impossible conflict. The universal ethical rule, you just don't kill your child, versus this individual's absolute personal duty to God.
Abraham's situation just lays it bare.
It's almost unbearable. And it's not just about Abraham's inner world, is it? It's a direct challenge to the big philosophy of the day, Hegel's system.
Absolutely.
And a pretty sharp critique of what Kierkegaard saw as, well, a complacent, watered-down version of Christianity, what he called Christendom.
So tackling this book, it's quite a task. Maybe the best way is to map it out a bit.
Yeah, good idea.
A roadmap.
We could start by really looking at how Kierkegaard presents the binding of Isaac, then maybe dive into that clash he sets up between the ethical and the religious spheres.
Okay.
After that, we can unpack some of those key concepts, the teleological suspension of the ethic.
That's a big one. The nights of resignation and faith, the absurd, and what he actually means by faith and obedience. And finally, maybe touch on the historical context and why it still matters. How does that sound?
Sounds like a plan, a real plunge. So, okay, let's start with the foundation, the binding of Isaac. Kierkegaard, or Johannes rather, zooms right in on Abraham's inner state, doesn't he?
He really does.
It's not just retelling this story, it's the psychological drama, that 3-day journey. The anxiety must have been crushing.
Unimaginable.
The love for Isaac, this promised child, and yet this silent, unwavering commitment to what he thinks God is asking. It's not treated like some simple allegory we can just decode and feel comfortable with.
That's so important. He resists any easy symbolic reading that softens the edges, that makes it less horrifying. He wants us to face the existential agony, the sheer paradox of it.
Right.
And to really drive that home, he gives us those 4 alternative versions of the story in the attunement section.
Oh yeah, those were fascinating. Like Abraham, who tries to make Isaac think he's a monster just to save Isaac's faith in God.
Right. Or the one who obeys, but it breaks him. He loses his own faith.
And the one who begs forgiveness just for thinking about it. And the Abraham who just can't do it. And because of that, Isaac loses faith.
Exactly. And what's brilliant about these what-ifs, these fail Abrahams, is how they actually highlight what's so unique and paradoxical about the real Abraham, the one Kierkegaard holds up as the father of faith.
They show what faith isn't.
Precisely. These other reactions, they might be tragic, but they're Well, they're more understandable, aren't they, within our usual ways of thinking about ethics or psychology.
They make a kind of human sense, yeah. But the Abraham Kierkegaard focuses on his faith is different. It's rooted in this intensely personal, almost defiant connection with God. It's this absolute trust in the promises, even when the command seems to blow those promises apart.
It's like believing two completely opposite things at the same time.
Yeah, which gets us to that really tricky idea. Believing by virtue of the absurd.
It's not just blind obedience, is it? It's this simultaneous conviction. I must sacrifice Isaac, and Isaac will somehow be restored, or the promise through him will still be fulfilled. It's a paradox reason just can't solve.
And the love Abraham has for Isaac, Kierkegaard really stresses that, doesn't he?
He does, repeatedly.
This isn't some abstract philosophical problem for Abraham. This is his son, the one he waited for, the embodiment of God's promise. That immense love, that huge personal stake, is what makes the potential sacrifice so agonizingly real. It's where ethical love crashes right into this absolute religious demand.
Exactly. And that crash, that collision, sets up Kierkegaard's whole discussion about the ethical versus the religious spheres. He defines the ethical sphere as the universal.
Okay, the universal, like moral laws that apply to everyone.
Pretty much. Duties, principles that hold true for all people in all situations. The goal within this ethical sphere is for the individual to rise above their personal inclinations and align themselves with these universal norms. You definitely hear echoes of Kant, and particularly Hegel here.
Right. So within that ethical framework, a father planning to kill his son is, well, it's beyond wrong. It's the ultimate violation. Anyone trying to put their own individual revelation above that universal law would be seen as needing to repent, to get back in line with the moral order.
But then Kierkegaard introduces the religious sphere, and this operates on totally different logic. It's not about the universal. It's about the single individual's direct, unmediated relationship with God.
Unmediated.
And here's the radical claim. In this religious sphere, Kierkegaard says, the single individual is higher than the universal.
Whoa. Okay, that is radical. So this direct personal link to the divine can actually override those universal ethical rules.
That's the implication. The ethical might see God as, the ultimate source of morality, but it's indirect. The religious sphere, as Kierkegaard paints it, is this immediate personal encounter. And it can lead to actions that look completely unethical from the outside.
Like Abraham's situation, the perfect horrifying example. His ethical duty shouts, protect your son. But his religious duty, as he understands it, commands the absolute unthinkable.
And this is Kierkegaard throwing down the gauntlet to Hegel. Hegel saw ethical life, family, society, the state as the highest point of human spirit, where individuals find their purpose.
Right, fitting into the bigger picture.
Kierkegaard flips it. He puts that intense inner relationship with God above conforming to any external ethical system. Abraham's story becomes this powerful, specific critique of Hegel's whole grand view.
It even turns the idea of temptation upside down, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, usually temptation pulls you away from doing the right ethical thing.
Sure.
But for Abraham, the temptation is actually to be ethical.
Yes. The temptation is to listen to that powerful, completely reasonable voice saying, don't do this insane thing, save your son.
Exactly. Resisting that very understandable ethical urge is what requires the leap of faith, the move into that personal religious sphere.
Precisely. And this collision, this tension, is where we find some of Kierkegaard's most famous and honestly most controversial ideas, like the teleological suspension of the ethical.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. The teleological suspension of the ethical sounds dense, but the basic idea is what? That the ethical rules can be put on hold.
Essentially, yes, suspended.
Yeah.
Set aside for a higher purpose, a higher telos or goal. And in Fear and Trembling, that higher goal is specifically fulfilling one's absolute duty to God.
And Abraham wanting to sacrifice Isaac is the prime example.
It's the unavoidable, deeply disturbing example. That basic ethical rule, don't murder, seems to be overridden by a direct command from God. And the crucial thing is, this act, this intended act, can't be justified within the ethical sphere itself. There's no higher ethical good Abraham is serving here.
Which is how Kierkegaard separates him from the tragic hero, right? Like Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Phigenia.
Exactly that distinction. Superficially, they look similar, both violating a core ethical duty, causing immense suffering. But the tragic hero, like Agamemnon, is acting for a reason the community can, at least in principle, understand.
Saving the fleet, winning the war.
Right. It serves a higher ethical purpose, however agonizing. It's recognizable within the universal order.
But Abraham
Abraham's intended act has zero universal justification. It comes purely from his private personal relationship with God. It's this radical privacy, the fact that it makes no ethical sense to anyone else, that marks him as the knight of faith. He's fundamentally different from the tragic hero, who ultimately still operates within the ethical realm, even at terrible cost.
You can see why this idea makes people nervous, though. Suspending the ethical. It sounds like it could justify anything.
Oh, absolutely. The concern is real and understandable. But many scholars argue Kierkegaard isn't just giving a free pass for immorality. It's more about challenging that Hegelian notion that the ethical is the absolute top level of existence.
He's saying there might be something beyond it.
Exactly, a religious dimension that transcends the ethical, where the individual's relationship with God becomes paramount, even if it results in actions that look ethically baffling from our human perspective. It's a critique of making ethics the be-all and end-all, rather than necessarily saying, go be unethical.
That's a subtle but really important difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so to understand this knight of faith better, he contrasts him with the knight of infinite resignation.
He does.
What's the deal with the knight of resignation?
The knight of infinite resignation represents the peak of what human strength and ethical understanding can achieve on their own. Kierkegaard talks about the movement of infinite resignation. Picture someone deeply passionate about something finite, maybe a person they love, a life goal, but they realize it's impossible.
All right.
This knight fully invests in that passion, sees its impossibility clearly, and then decisively renounces it, gives it up completely. They find a kind of spiritual peace by detaching from that specific finite thing and connecting with the eternal, the infinite. They sort of leap upwards, but they remain detached from the concrete world in a way.
So they accept the loss, find peace beyond it. But the knight of faith, they do something more, that double movement.
That's the key. The knight of faith also makes that first move infinite resignation. They fully grasp the loss, accept the impossibility according to reason. They renounce it just as completely.
Okay.
But then comes the second paradoxical move. They believe, by virtue of the absurd, that they will actually get back the very finite thing they just resigned.
Wait, how? That sounds completely contradictory. Resign it fully, but believe you'll get it back.
Exactly. That's the absurd part. It's faith operating beyond reason's limits. Abraham resigns Isaac, accepts the loss completely, yet simultaneously believes God will restore him or fulfill the promise anyway.
Wow. Okay. And outwardly, these knights of faith aren't necessarily obvious.
Not at all. Kierkegaard suggests they might look perfectly ordinary, like a tax collector or just anyone. They engage with the finite world, maybe even joyfully, not necessarily with that melancholic air you might expect from the Knight of Resignation. Their enjoyment is different, though it's like everything finite is received back as a pure gift, thanks to that absurd leap of faith.
And that connects to repetition, doesn't it? Getting it back isn't just rewinding the tape, it's experiencing it anew.
Precisely. Repetition is that paradoxical recovery. What was giving up is received again, but transformed, experienced as a fresh gift because of faith in the absurd. It's forward-looking. It contrasts with the recollection of the Knight of Resignation, who kind of looks backward, having made peace with leaving the finite behind.
Okay, so this term keeps coming up, the absurd. What exactly does Kierkegaard mean? It's not just something silly, right?
No, not silly at all. For Kierkegaard, the absurd isn't just unlikely or improbable. It's what fundamentally contradicts human reason, logic, and our ethical understanding. It marks the boundary of rational thought. That's where faith begins.
And Abraham's situation is the absolute peak of the absurd.
Totally. God gives him Isaac, promises nations through him, then says kill him. It's a flat contradiction from a human standpoint. That is the absurd.
And Abraham's response, planning to obey the command to kill, while also believing the promise through Isaac would still hold true, that's embracing it.
That's the embrace. And it demands the leap of faith. It's not a conclusion reached through argument. It's a decisive jump, a commitment beyond reason, beyond ethical justification, into this incomprehensible territory. Johannes, the narrator, explicitly says he can't make that leap.
And it's through this commitment, this virtue of the absurd, that the impossible seems to become possible through God's power. So real faith isn't about finding logical proofs.
Not at all.
It's about embracing that contradiction, pushing past the limits of our understanding.
Precisely. Which brings us round to thinking about what faith and obedience really are in this picture. Kierkegaard is very clear. Faith operates outside the realm of proof, beyond ethical justification. It starts where thinking stops.
And it's intensely personal, that inwardness he talks about. A passionate, subjective commitment before God, marked by, well, by fear and trembling.
That phrase is powerful, isn't it, from Philippians? It suggests this immense personal responsibility, maybe even awe and dread, that goes with that direct relationship with the divine.
And that intensity, that passion, is what he felt was missing from the mainstream Christianity of his time, from Christendom.
Absolutely. He saw it as lukewarm, overly rationalized, lacking that existential edge. Real faith for him is demanding, unsettling, and because it's so personal, so beyond the universal ethical language, the knight of faith is isolated.
Abraham's silence again.
It's a symbol of that incommunicability. He can't explain himself in a way others can ethically accept or even understand. Kierkegaard even suggests one knight of faith can't necessarily understand another.
And it's crucial to see this isn't just blind obedience, is it?
Yeah.
It's more complex than just following orders.
Much more complex. Yes, Abraham is obedient, but it's tied to this deep trust in God's ultimate goodness and the promises God made, even when the command seems to fly in the face of all that. That belief in Isaac's restoration, however paradoxical, is key.
It's that holding on to the impossible possibility, committing despite zero rational certainty. That's what makes it faith, not just compliance.
Exactly. It's a radical commitment made right in the teeth of uncertainty and the absurd.
Now, to really get a grip on this, it helps to remember the context, right? What was going on intellectually in Denmark at the time? Hegel was huge.
Oh, massive. Hegelianism was the dominant force in Danish philosophy. His whole system, the dialectic, prioritizing the universal over the individual, ethical life and the state as the highest goal, religion being sort of a stepping stone to philosophy, all that was incredibly influential.
And Fear and Trembling feels like Kierkegaard just taking direct aim at all of that.
It really is. In many ways, it's a polemic. He's championing the individual subjective passion, this religious dimension, that he insists philosophy can't just neatly contain or explain away. He's basically flipping Hegel's hierarchy on its head.
And it wasn't just abstract philosophy he was reacting against, was it? There was the Danish Golden Age happening, lots of art and culture.
True, a flourishing time in Copenhagen. But Kierkegaard was also a fierce critic of the religious scene, the established state church. He thought it had become too comfortable, too rational, too socially acceptable. It had lost the core passion, the paradox, the offense of true Christianity, in his view.
You can't really ignore his personal life either, can you? His father's melancholy, the strict upbringing, the broken engagement with Ridgen Olsen.
No, you can't. Well, we have to be careful not to just reduce his philosophy to biography. Those experiences undoubtedly shaped his concerns. The themes of sacrifice, resignation, that painful clash between ethics and religion, they resonate so strongly with his life, especially that broken engagement. The example of the young man and the princess in the book feels very personal.
It feels like he's wrestling with these things himself, deeply.
I think that's undeniable. The book carries that weight of intense personal struggle alongside its philosophical arguments.
It's amazing how this book, born from that specific time and personal context, has echoed down through the years. It wasn't a bestseller right away, though.
No, not at all. Initial reception was pretty limited, mostly in Scandinavia, and early on, people often read it biographically, trying to map it onto the Regine Olsen affair.
Okay.
It really took off internationally much later, in the 20th century, especially after the World Wars, when translations became available, and its themes seemed to speak powerfully to a new generation grappling with existence.
And then it just exploded, influencing so many different areas.
It really did. Existentialists, both religious and atheist, found so much in it: the focus on the individual, subjective truth, anxiety, freedom, choice, the absurd. Abraham became this kind of emblem of radical choice.
Yeah.
Theologians, especially Protestants, were deeply impacted. The emphasis on God's otherness, the critique of easy religion, divine commands. It fueled debates in ethics about universalism versus individual duty. People like Levinas raised concerns about its potential dangers.
Understandably.
And then you have literary critics looking at its style, psychologists drawing on its insights into anxiety and despair.
Yeah.
It just branched out everywhere.
It's incredible, really. One book sparking so many different conversations.
I think it's because the paradoxes are so deep and unresolved. The things that make it hard to pin down are exactly what keep it relevant. It forces you back to fundamental questions about faith, reason, ethics, meaning. Questions that don't go away.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways that stick with you?
For me, it's definitely that core tension, universal ethics versus personal faith, that collision. Also, the idea of the absurd, not as nonsense, but as the space where faith might have to operate. And that distinction between the night of resignation and the night of faith.
the double movement.
That double movement, it's such a powerful image. The book just fundamentally challenges any comfortable assumptions about how faith and reason fit together or how morality works when God enters the picture.
It really makes you think about your own life, doesn't it? Times when maybe what society expected, the universal, felt out of step with some deep personal conviction or calling.
Which raises that final question maybe for our listeners to ponder. Is there a part of human experience that just goes beyond logic, beyond ethics that everyone can agree on? Can real conviction sometimes lead us to places that look irrational, even wrong from the outside? Thinking about Kierkegaard's exploration of faith in that light.
Mhm.
It's pretty profound.
Definitely food for thought. And this has really just been a starting point, hasn't it? Fear and Trembling is one of those books you can return to again and again.
Absolutely. We'd really encourage listeners to read it themselves, explore Kierkegaard's other works. There's so much more depth and complexity, and the debates around it are still very much alive.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. It's been fascinating. And thanks to all of you for sharing your sources and diving in with us.